I just wanted to jump on real quick before we begin this episode. About 3/4 of the way through, Dr. Drew had a little bit of a technical issue, and we had to switch from his computer over to his phone. So you're going to notice like a slight clip, and then you're going to notice that the audio sounds a little bit different. And so there was just a small issue. We had to switch from computer to phone, but I wanted to let you know that there is a difference in the audio, and you are definitely going to be able to tell that something funky happened there. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode.
This rule was put in because someone thought it was important, and it's actually counterintuitive. In those situations, I just completely disregard it. And that sometimes did cause me problems, still causes me problems. But I think that's the little bit of rebel in me, where it's just like, I'm not just going to follow orders because there's an order there. It's more just like, if this makes logical, intuitive sense, like, don't cross the median because you're going to hurt somebody with your vehicle. Like, that makes sense, so I don't do it.
That is Dr. Drew Timmermans this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey there, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. My name is Ian, and this is my podcast. I am the host, and I'm glad that you made it here today to spend some time with us. Before we get into this week's guest, I do have a couple housekeeping things that I would like to ask you for right up front. The first of which is, if you could take just a couple minutes and leave a review on whatever app it is that you are using to listen to this podcast, I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. It's going to help me with some exposure for the show in the iTunes rankings and everywhere else, and it's going to help bring in some new listeners to this podcast. So I would appreciate it if you could take a couple minutes to leave a review. Also, if you are interested in supporting the podcast and supporting me and the work that I do, please take a minute to go to the doitforyourself.com/support and take a look at that and see if you would like to help support the show. There is a lot that goes into the show on the back end that there are costs associated with, so we need some help with that at times. Let's get into my guest for this week. My guest this week is Dr. Drew Timmermans. And Dr. Drew is a naturopathic doctor, and he is working at his own practice, but it hasn't always been that way for him. When Dr. Drew applied for medical school, he was actually denied the first time that he applied, and he continued to pursue this goal because this was his passion, and it was something that he really, really wanted to work towards. And so he went through his medical school and discovered this new and different way of practicing medicine. And it was something that really piqued his interest. And it was something that he didn't see in the more traditional medical field. And so this was the path that Dr. Drew decided to go down. And we get a chance to weave our way through his story of going through this, going through his training, and now getting to the point where he is owning his own practice. So I am really looking forward to sharing this episode with you, and I hope that you enjoy. Well, Dr. Drew, and we actually just talked about this, but I'm going to go with Dr. Drew for this episode. I hope you don't mind. Dr. Drew, thank you so much for joining me on the Do It For Yourself podcast. I am really looking forward to getting into your story and talking about some of the things that you're up to, especially in this pain management space. I am trying to manage some pain myself right now from today's workouts, as I have my power dot going on my calves as we kind of get started. But I would like, before we get into your story, what I would like from you is if you could give me a brief intro and tell the listener of the podcast what you are up to and kind of what your day to day looks like.
Of course, and thanks for having me on, Ian. So, my name is Drew Timmermans. I'm a naturopathic doctor, which some people might have heard of, other people might not have heard of. So, I'll just spend a second there. So, within the different branches of medicine, there are obviously different branches. There's your what you think of most commonly here in the U.S. when you think of a physician, as you think of an MD or a DO. However, in I believe it's like 26 states or something like that right now, and growing, there are naturopathic doctors who are licensed and regulated in the same ways that MDs and DOs are. Meaning, I have a board that I report to. Because I prescribe pharmaceuticals, I have to report to the FDA, and I have a DEA number and all of those things. And so we're a different branch of medicine that just has a slightly different philosophy, in the same way that osteopathic doctors have a slightly different philosophy than medical doctors. And so there's only 7 naturopathic medical schools across the US and Canada. And so I am out here in Arizona, where I went to the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, where I eventually went on and completed a residency in pain management and integrative regenerative medicine. And so that's kind of my background story. And I'm sure we'll get a bit more into a little bit about that. But my day to day is a mix. So I myself and my wife own our medical practice. My wife actually just graduated from naturopathic med school, so she's going on to also be a naturopathic doctor. But we own our own practice, and so with that comes running a practice and growing a practice while also being on the clinical side and seeing patients. I love to teach. And so I actually still have a student clinical rotation at the naturopathic med school once a week, where I go and oversee students as they see patients, and I help them in their training and teach their training. And so I have that as well. And so it's a mix between the business side, being an entrepreneur, trying to, make it in that sense, but also helping patients along the way. And so that's so each day ends up being different in that sense. Some days is pure clinical from 8 a.m. until 7 p.m. and other days I strategically have it just set aside for more strategy, marketing, biz development kind of stuff.
And how common is this? And is it something that people are seeking out, or is it something that people are recommended to come to you for this form of medicine?
It's a little bit of both, but so there is a lot of, I don't want to say hatred, but in some respects there is hatred, but there is a lot of backlash from the conventional medical community towards naturopathic doctors. And so and I don't know the percentage, but I'm going to make a rough approximation that probably only 10 to 20% of MDs and DOs actually have respect for naturopathic medicine. The 80 to 90% don't. And so there is referrals from outside of the naturopathic community, but it's very, very seldom, just because it's part political, but it also just gets into, so taking a step back, when I was mentioning that right now only about 20, I think it's 24, 26 states recognize naturopathic doctors as licensed physicians. That means that there are some states where there's no regulatory board. So someone can go and they can take, a 4-week class, or they can do a 1-year but weekends only certification in natural medicine or natural healing, and they can go around calling themselves a naturopath, which is technically different than a naturopathic doctor or a naturopathic physician. Or in some states like Arizona here and Washington, we can use the term naturopathic medical doctor. And so because of that, there are, and especially now with the big boom in, the digital media and stuff like that, that people will see, even like myself, I've heard stories where someone will see that I'm a naturopathic doctor. They want to go see someone who's like-minded, but they don't want to come to Arizona. So they go to someone local, and it turns out that that person wasn't actually a naturopathic doctor. They were just a naturopath, and they're not trained to be a physician. They're not trained to diagnose. They're not trained to see the big red flags, like when patients walk in with cancer, but it's just stomach pain. And so because of that, there have been big stories that have hit, the mainstream media over the last 10 to 15 years of these cases where people went into a naturopath and big things were missed. People got hurt, people were given simple herbal things when it was really like raging cancer and the person died. And so because of that, there's a bad taste in some people's mouths for the entire naturopathic profession, which bleeds over into the naturopathic medical profession. And so because of that, we have a long way to go to kind of repair those relationships. And we're working on that. Actually, just last week, naturopathic doctors got approved to actually work inside the VA, which is a big, big step forward because it's the first time that we've been recognized by a government sanctioned organization to actually provide medical care. And so it's things like that that will help us to gain that recognition. So then back to the original question, most of the time it's patients are either they find it themselves because they are not happy with the care that they're getting in the conventional system, or they are not happy and they're talking with friends and family who have been, who know a naturopath or who know or have been helped by a naturopathic doctor or something to that effect. And they say, oh, you need to go and check this person out. Because in most states, we don't have great insurance coverage. And so most naturopathic doctors don't accept insurance. And so because of that, it's not like just going on your, Cigna website and looking up what doctors are in network. It's word of mouth referrals, a lot of it.
Well, and then I'm sure we'll get into this when we discuss the business side of it, but there's also going to be a cost that's associated with that because you're not accepting insurance. And so,
Correct.
People are going to have to pay these out-of-pocket costs, which even if you go to the doctor right now, for some people, it still costs, $40-$50 copay just to see your primary care provider. And then if you're going to go see a specialist, that could be upwards of $80-$100 every time you go see that specialist. So there's always, costs associated with this, but I'm sure not accepting insurance, is definitely something that could propose some issues.
100%.
But what I want to get into, and I kind of want to take a couple steps back because I want to talk about when you were getting ready to go to med school and you made the decision to go down this road because, as you just said, there's been a lot of kickback, in regards to this and because of some of these situations and some of these things that have been happening. It seems as though this isn't something that's very popular
No.
when you're thinking about med school. So how did you land on this particular avenue and why did you go down this avenue?
Yeah. So in middle of high school, grade 10 or 11 was kind of when I had initially set my sights on becoming a physician. I'd always had a passion and interest in physiology, the human body, and all that kind of stuff, but I wasn't sure what exactly to do with it. And I played a lot of sports, and so I, at one point thought exercise, physiology, and that kind of stuff. But in about grade 10, 11 is when I decided, no, I'm gonna become a doctor. And initially, my even though I had that sports side of it, I initially didn't even consider, pain management or orthopedics or anything like that. I actually had a big interest in cardiology, and so my initial actual pursuits were I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. And so I had kind of planned everything around that. I did spend some time at the university hospital. So I'm originally from Ontario, Canada. And so I went to the University of Western Ontario, and we have a pretty large size university hospital there. And so I spent some time there, got to see an open heart surgery and a few other things, which was very interesting. But it just didn't, and it's so I always kind of laugh at myself when I say this, but I literally stood like at the head of the patient where the anesthesiologist stands on a stool overlooking the surgery with an open heart surgery. So literally looking down at a man's heart in his chest cavity. And as fascinating and mind blowing as that is, like where we are in terms of medicine, it just didn't do it for me. And I left that surgery being like, that's interesting. I didn't get like a rush that I thought I would have on seeing that, and like a desire to go and learn more about that. So I'm like, okay. So then I thought, well, I know I still want to do medicine, so maybe I'll just, step back and reevaluate. And that's kind of where some of the orthopedic side of stuff came into it, especially as around that time, so I was a competitive track and field athlete. I competed in the 400 and the 600. And around that time, so sort of in third year university, I really started to follow Kelly Starrett of Mobility WOD and really got into this kind of human performance side of things with, musculoskeletal medicine. And so started down that track and really got passionate about that and that kind of stuff. And so I thought, okay, I think I'm gonna go do, orthopedics. And so went through, finished undergrad, applied to medical school. So step back, I've never heard really of naturopathic medicine at this point still. So this is still full on MD, surgeon type stuff. So I applied to a few different med schools in the US and in Canada, had some interviews, but didn't get accepted. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll take a year off. I'll work, and then I'm gonna do some because on my applications, the areas that I was weakest in was volunteer work because I was a competitive track and field athlete. Like that was my life for 5 years in university, and so started into volunteer work, but then started working as a personal trainer at one of the gyms in kind of where I grew up. And over that time was when I started to develop my own internal kind of compass on medicine, because I would have my clients come in and, they'd be working with me for 3-4 months, and they'd say, yeah, I had a doctor's appointment last week, and they took me off 2 of my 3 blood pressure medications because I was actually low blood pressure. And all we were doing was exercise and cleaning up their diet. And it was just like these stories just kept coming in of patients getting off cholesterol medication and, blood pressure medication and all this other stuff. And I was really excited about that. So that was like my first kind of instance of, my internal philosophy, which I was never big medication to begin with. Like my parents didn't take a lot of medication, so it wasn't really a culture thing growing up. But this was now, and I was really starting to get interested in supplements and fish oil and, that basic stuff you kind of get exposed to on your first time getting introduced to supplements. And then one of my clients was that I had gotten pretty close with. She was like, hey, you should check out naturopathic medicine. And I'm like, what is this? And so, I go home and I look it up online, and so naturopathic medicine has these 6 principles, which are basically the principles on which we practice medicine, which are going to be things like, treat the whole person, look for the root cause, use nature as medicine, try to teach when you're working with patients and things like that. And so I read these, and it just resonated with me on a level that I didn't realize could. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. Like the morals of naturopathic medicine just fit in with exactly what I had already known were my internal morals, and they were just on the screen here. And so I looked into the different schools, started researching. There was so CCNM, the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, was in Toronto, which was about 2 hours from me. So I went and checked them out, and then came out here to Arizona for my interview. So this was my I went out to BC first for my first interview. They have a small school in BC, and then came out here to Arizona and just absolutely fell in love with the weather. Let's be honest, the weather, the people, the school, like how warm and inviting they were here and stuff. And I was just like, yep, I guess I'm moving across the continent basically to Arizona. And so that's kind of how and so taking a little step forward now on the way that I practice medicine, I still have a lot of that allopathic, that MD style thinking where I have no problem writing a prescription when it's needed, but I'm just going to try to do, as long as it's safe, I'm going to try to do the other things first for my patients to have them maybe not have a medication or not as many medications. So that's kind of how I kind of came down this road. And to be honest, it is rare. Like if you talk to a lot of MD students or DO students and you ask like how they, got there, you'll find a large percentage of them are like, oh, my parents are both physicians, or oh, my uncle's a physician. And I look up, like, it's a lot of that. I know two people in like of all the NDs I've talked to, it's like two of them where they're like, yeah, my parents are naturopathic doctors. Like that's it. So it's super cool because there's a lot of people who they have their own way of finding the profession, but it's a true calling because like it seeks you out as opposed to you seeking it out most of the time.
Now, are either of your parents doctors?
No.
Okay.
I think my great uncle on my dad's side was a physician, but outside that, there's no one really. My uncle was EMS, when he was younger and stuff. But no, there's no real medical in my family.
And so there's a couple things that I wanted to unpack from what you were just talking about. And the first thing that I really want to talk about is that when you applied to med school for the first time, you didn't get accepted. And
Correct.
For a lot of people, not just in med school and applying, but across the board, no pun intended, if the first time you try something and you are quote unquote not accepted, whether you're actually applying for something or you try to get into a new group and you try to get into a new sport or whatever the case may be, right? You're quote unquote not accepted. People take that as, okay, this isn't for me and I'm out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you tried to find a different path, and you knew kind of one of the reasons why, and you said it was your volunteer hours, but what made you stay the path instead of saying, okay, this isn't for me, and just throwing your hands up?
I is my passion. I knew that what I wanted to do was medicine, and I wanted to help people in that capacity. And I wasn't going to let a little obstacle, big obstacle at that time, but let an obstacle stop me from fulfilling something that I was so passionate about. And so it was just okay, that happened. How do I regroup? What do I need to change? And for the longest time, it wasn't even okay, I'll find a different path. It was just like, no, this is still my path. And they tell you the stats going in, 10% are going to be accepted from what apply. And I'm like, okay, I'm not in that 10%. Like that doesn't mean I'm the bottom, but it just means I'm not in the top 10%. I could have been the 12%. I could have been the 30th percent, right? Don't know that for sure. But what I did know was I didn't get accepted. And so it's got to get at bat again. Just get up there and keep swinging until you find what is how you're going to live out your passion.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is when you were a child and then also coming up like through high school and everything, were you ever one of the ones who kind of went against the grain, maybe didn't necessarily do some of the things that, people were suggesting or, hey, this is definitely what you should do, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I ever thought about that. Well, I don't. I don't think so. So I grew up a slightly gifted on the mathematics side of of education and learning, but I think I definitely suffered in interpersonal skills because of that. The universe balances you out in some way,
Right.
but but I but I'm trying to think. I don't think there was ever really any pressure from teachers or family to go down a mathematics type uh, learning path or anything like that. I mean, I kind of just did what I wanted to in high school and when I was
That
a
so yeah,
kid,
that's what I
which
was gonna. That's what I mean. Like so, even throughout high school and stuff like that, were you the kid who was maybe goofing off when you like technically weren't supposed to be, or were you not necessarily like a rebel, but a rule breaker or somebody who went against what they were supposed to do, not even necessarily just hey Drew, you should really go into math, that's your strong suit,
right, yeah,
but
yeah.
like hey Drew, can you should take out the trash, and you're like, well, I'm not going to do that because you're telling me that I should do that.
So I wouldn't say I was a rebel in that sense, but what I definitely was, and this still plays out today, is I don't follow stupid rules.
Mm,
So if a rule doesn't make logical sense to me, that you can just kind of step back and you're just like, this this rule was put in because someone thought it was important and it's actually counterintuitive. In those situations, I just completely disregard it. And that sometimes did cause me problems, still causes me problems. But I, I think that's the little bit of rebel in me where it's just like I'm not just going to follow orders because there's an order there. It's more just like if this makes logical, intuitive sense, like don't cross the median because you're going to hurt somebody with your vehicle, like that makes sense, so I don't do it. But other things, I'm trying to think of a decent example. A lot of it comes up like when I was a resident at the naturopathic med school. Like there were just some rules that were just like, this is the stupidest rule. It makes literally no sense. And me doing this thing or not doing this thing doesn't change the impact of anything in the world. But it's just like I still get reprimanded for not doing this thing that no one's ever going to know I did or didn't do. And so I think it kind of plays out in that. But I don't think I was ever like, I mean, I goofed off, of course, but never um, a big like just rebel, like screw the system type kid or anything like that.
yeah. So that the story that you just gave and talking about not following rules that are stupid, that's absolutely perfect. That's totally perfect. That's exactly along the lines of what I was thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
And so you find the school that you want to go to, and you find the program that you want to go to. You did mention that there's a residency program that you have to go through, but is the program and residency and everything involved all the same length of time that it would have been if you went to traditional medical school?
So the first 4 years, so actual naturopathic med school, is the same length as medical school. It's four
Mm-hmm.
years,
Okay.
and so that's same. Now the structure is slightly different. So the first 2 years are near identical in course hours and courses that we take. So it's which is hilarious when you actually, because I've been in a few Twitter wars where people just don't even grasp, like they don't even think that natural doctors take like human physiology. They just think I don't even know what they think we do in med school. But we have anatomy and physiology, we have biochemistry, we have endocrinology, like all the organ systems and pharmacology. But then we also have other things like herbal medicine and how we can use plants to help heal and things like that. And so the first 2 years is purely didactic, and so it's all in the class, learning all that kind of stuff. Now the third and fourth year is where it slightly differentiates from the conventional MD or DO. On the MD and DO side of things, that's when they start their clinical observations. And so for 2 years, they rotate through different fields, right? They'll do 2 months in ENT, and then they'll do 2 months in ortho. They'll do 2 months in cardio, and they'll rotate through shadowing different docs in clinical practice, but also in the hospitals. Whereas on the in naturopathic med school, that's actually the third and fourth years when students actually get in the clinic and start working with patients. And so all of this is because in third and fourth year, where they're just medical students, we were under the supervision of an attending physician, and then also usually a resident physician as well, one or two. So there's either anywhere from 1 to 3 doctors overseeing the clinical care. And so typically how that would look would be, patient comes in, they meet the doctor first, and then the student is the one to get all the information out of the patient in terms of, what they're coming in for, what they've tried before, and all that kind of stuff. And then the student tries to come up with the diagnosis, what labs, what imaging they want to do. And this is all guided by the physician. And depending on the level and strength of the student, sometimes, like even now, sometimes I have to step in quite a bit and help students in getting to a diagnosis. Other times they come to the diagnosis on their own, and I agree with it, and I like how they want to approach it. And then they come up with a treatment plan. Again, whether that's a referral to a different physician, because there are some things that are better suited with going to see a medical doctor or an osteopathic doctor versus an ND, or it'll be, whether it's supplements, herbs, diet, lifestyle, medication, whatever we have in our tool belt to use. And so that is the first big difference. And so because of that, residencies in naturopathic medicine are actually not mandatory as of this point.
Okay.
Now, I would like them to be, because they add a huge clinical benefit to students, but and also it will elevate us in the eyes of the conventional system, because what they see is they think that in our third and fourth year we just observe. So basically we do what they do, is observe other physicians, and then all of a sudden we graduate and we're practicing medicine. And that's not what happens. When we graduate, we have had 2 full years of seeing hundreds of patients. And now, mind you, we do great. We don't do acute medicine. Like I've never treated someone for a burst appendix, because that's not what our medicine is. That's acute care medicine that is handled in hospitals. And naturopathic doctors are not. We can augment and assist in hospitals as once the patient is no longer about to die and they're recovering, then we can assist with some certain things. But surgeries and pharmaceuticals are the bread and butter of acute care medicine in the hospital. That's what you want. That's what you need most of the time. And so we don't treat the things where people are walking in and it's you have to make 4 right decisions in a row in 3 seconds, or this patient could likely start spiraling out of control and die. They're coming in because their shoulder's been hurting them for 3 years and no one can figure out why. They're coming in because they have been having diarrhea for the past 10 years and no one can figure out why, and doctors just keep giving them medications. Or, they come in because they are just sad all the time and they're depressed and it's hurting their marriage. And so it's a totally different, it's chronic disease medicine. It's not acute care medicine. And but the residencies still allow for additional specialized training, such as for me, I got advanced training in using image guidance for my regenerative injection therapy. So that's where I got the bulk of my hands-on for how to do my injection procedures under fluoroscopy, which is X-ray guidance, and also ultrasound guidance. So that way I can provide better, safer care to my patients in private practice. And so most residencies will range between 1 to 3 years, with realistically most of them just being 1 or 2 years. And so because of that, the entire duration ends up being shorter going down the naturopathic medical route than the MD or the DO route, because they've got the 4 years plus a minimum 3 years for residency if they're just going to do like family medicine or something like that. But then theirs could, if you're doing anesthesiology or something like that, it could extend out an additional, 3 to 5 years on top of that first 3 years. So there is a big difference there. But again, I think it all ties into, an anesthesiologist has the life of someone in their hands, that they make one wrong mistake and that patient dies.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that in naturopathic medicine. If I give someone an herb and there's a better herb that they could have used, they're not going to die. We didn't get as good of a result as we could have. And so, yeah, so it's different. And I think I'm glad we got to touch on this, because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about naturopathic medicine is they look at this and go, oh, well, you guys don't even have a residency, so you clearly are incompetent. And that is far, far from the truth.
And would you like to see MDs and DOs and then NDs work together? And, say somebody comes in and they have an open heart surgery, and they needed to have that open heart surgery because they had an extremely poor diet, they were inactive, and they were not living a healthy lifestyle. So they come in, they have their open heart surgery, and then instead of post open heart surgery, okay, here's your, blood pressure medications, here's your blood thinners, here's this and this. You essentially leave with, this to-go bag full of prescriptions. They then transition and send them to you, and they say, Dr. Drew, here's what this patient was doing. We did the open heart surgery. And then you could look at their diet, you could look at their exercise regimen, and you could prescribe some, herbs to them. You could tell them to try, a few different things, but it would put them on a different path. And essentially, you would be working together. Like, it would be a team effort in this, basically helping everyone get healthy.
100%. And I hope one day we truly do get to that place, because I think, especially if we can get that in the hospitals, in mainstream insurance, but if we had that type of continuity of care with patients, it would, I think, it would be phenomenal for the healthcare system, but also the patient population, because they'd be getting the best of both worlds.
And I don't know if there is an ND or if it's legal here in Delaware, but I would much rather go down that route, because I am like you. I don't like to take prescription medications if I don't have to. Now, if I've had, not just a stuffy nose, but I mean, if I've been like, my whole sinuses are congested, and the red flag for me is the pressure. So if I lean over to put my shoe on and I have pressure in my cheeks and my forehead, I automatically know sinus infection. I got to get something, right? Like, there's not, Dayquil and some of these things aren't going to work. So I'll go to the doctor. But I'm the kind of person who I would much rather, one, catch it up front and use some natural remedies. But I would much rather kind of go down the road like you were saying. Now, granted, if I have a broken arm or I need surgery, I'm not saying that I'm not going to go to the doctor, but I would like to see using the doctors for something that they specialize in, like, broken arms or heart surgeries, like you were saying, and then some of these other things where there's different remedies and you don't necessarily have to use a prescription medication. I would definitely like to see that become more popular.
No, I think that would be phenomenal. And yeah, currently Delaware is not a licensed state. And so if you ended up going somewhere that would, and they claimed they were a naturopath, they'd be an unlicensed naturopath, because the state's not licensed.
Well, and I'm going to have to do some more research because I'm in the tri-state area, so I'm actually right on the border of Pennsylvania and Maryland where I am.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
Maryland is,
okay,
Pennsylvania is not, or no, Pennsylvania is, I'm sorry, both Pennsylvania and Maryland
there you go.
are licensed. So you would just have to just pop into one of those states and you'd be fine.
There you go. Well, I work in Pennsylvania, so
Gotcha.
it's perfect. My parents live in Pennsylvania, so we are really not far, but it would definitely be a little bit more research to find out, if there's anyone in the particular area where we are,
Yep.
but might be something that's worth looking at.
Hmm.
And so once you get through your residency and you're really starting to, get close to your graduation, um, when does this idea of starting your own practice come into play?
So it actually started in first year med school. So in my it was the end of my first quarter, start of my second quarter. So literally like 3 months in is actually when I first started regenerative performance. Now, initially it was just like a blog. I had a website, a blog, an Instagram account where I just, put out some information to help, people learn more and that kind of stuff. And at that time, it was still very, very, mobility WOD movement based stuff, because at that time, that's what I knew really, really well. It wasn't, I wasn't hopping on being like, oh, take this for your diabetes, because one, that'd be giving medical advice while I was still a medical student, and that's a big no-no. But two, I also at that time still didn't know a lot in that realm, and so it was mainly focused on movement. And so regenerative performance, and so right from that time, I always knew that I was going to own my own practice at some point. And thinking back, it probably ties into I just didn't want to work for people who had stupid rules, or I enjoyed doing what I knew what I wanted to do, which was practice medicine the way I wanted to practice it, run a business the way I wanted to run a business. And so I guess a little additional backstory. So my dad owns his own cremation urn and picture frame business. So he's a cabinet maker by trade, so basically a woodworker. And when I was maybe like 8 or 9 years old, he sold his cutlass to start his business, which was, at that initial time was just making wholesale custom picture frames in his garage. And, he's still to this day, I'm actually trying to really get him to do more social media stuff. But to this day, he still has that business and it's his side business and he loves it. And so growing up, I had that, in the back of my mind as well, like, helping my dad with his business. And so I think that probably laid a little foundation for, owning my own practice and stuff like that. And so then there's that. And then I met my wife in med school, and she had kind of been along the same lines where that kind of more resonated with her. And so as we started getting more serious, it was like, hey, well, let's do this together. We were 2 years apart in the program, but just really passionate about having our own thing that was ours, and we could mold it into the way we wanted it to, and kind of just grow it together was really exciting to us. And so we were out the gate running right away. So once residency finished, it was like I took a day break, and then it was fully into starting the clinical side of and technically actually the clinical marketing and stuff started before my residency ended. So that way, once my residency ended, I could just easily roll over into, having patients in private practice and things like that.
So coming out of med school and going right into your own practice, I would imagine you're coming out with some debt,
Yeah.
which that could be an understatement. But on top of that, starting your own business, that's going to provide its own challenges as well. And one of the things that a lot of people who are doing it for themselves may hear from time to time, especially when they say, "Hey, here's my idea," you're going to get a common response of, "You're nuts," and that's never going to work. So, is that something that you heard? And how did you respond to something along those lines? Maybe it wasn't that wasn't exactly what was said, but it was probably something close to it.
Um, so I've had this question before, and I actually only think, and one, it might have been I just had super focused blinders on and never really, like someone might have said it and it just never even registered with me. Like that's just how little the opinion of somebody else like really mattered. But I think I recall like one, maybe two times where, someone had mentioned something that basically to the effect of, because I didn't want to just open a single clinic and, have it be moderately successful. Like I'm the type where, no, I'm opening a clinic and it's going to be massive and it is going to be wildly successful. And I want to open up multiple clinics and I want to create brand recognition. Like I want to be a name in this space, not just I just be my own boss. And so, so I think those, the one or two times, like I didn't even really register with the person who said it. And again, I don't even vaguely remember who it was, but it just like was in one ear and out the other, just because it was. And maybe even thinking back, it's kind of like the first round rejection with med school. It's just like, okay, well, honestly, if this fails, because there's been tough times in the business, and if it fails, it fails, and you pick up and you do it again. Like to me, if regenerative performance failed and we filed bankruptcy and whatever else because the economy collapsed and just no one wants to pay money for healthcare, um, except in the last recession, healthcare spending I heard actually went up. But if that happened, I wouldn't go, okay, I guess I'll go work for somebody else. Like, I mean, I might do that for a year or two because it's, job dependency while I'm building my thing on the side with an exit plan. But it is just so doing my own thing and owning my own business, with my wife. That just is me. It just resonates with me. And I don't think I'd be able to do without it. And so it was just in one ear and out the other.
So my goal is to always ask questions that nobody has asked before. So I'm a little mad at myself that somebody had already asked you that question. But on top of that, then the next thing that I want to ask you about is your dad owns his own business as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so was he a support system for you and a resource for you when it came to building your business? And if he was, how important was it to have that support system and resource in your corner when it came to building up your practice or starting your practice, I should say?
So I would say I probably, if anything, it meant a lot to me. Like, I'd have talks with my dad about the business and stuff, and it's two very different fields. It's always just been him in his business, while employing the child labor of us as teenagers. But he's never really grown it to the size where he hires another employee or anything like that. And he kind of likes it like that. And just he does it because he's super passionate and he likes working with his hands and creating in that sense. And so it was always super important, and it made me feel close to him when like he would recognize that we were growing and different obstacles that we were overcoming, whether it's getting a bit of financial backing or a new logo or just things like that. And so that's probably, it's been more of a thing that brings us closer, because obviously we he's still living in Canada and I'm here. And so I think more so as opposed to helping in the sense of giving business tactics or strategies. Actually, I'm probably giving him a bit more of that right now, just because he's still in the a little old school marketing of, doing flyers and things like that. And like I said earlier, I'm trying to get him more on, LinkedIn and Facebook, trying to connect with, the people who would, the funeral homes and stuff who would buy from him. And so I've been kind of helping him more on that side, which is funny. That's a little flipped, but just having that, that connection with him has been really important to me.
And what about having the connection with your wife and, having somebody who is just as interested in doing this as you were? Do you think that you still would have gone ahead and done it had she said, well, to be honest, Drew, I'm not really interested in owning my own practice or, being really a part of something like that. I kind of wanted to just go and work at, another practice that, all the financials and advertising and everything else, that's up to somebody else,
Yeah. I still think I would have, and then I just would have done a good job at not bringing that home. And so what I mean by that is if she, didn't want to have to worry about, the financials or like any of that stuff, I would have just probably kept work at work. And when I was home with her. So because that's not what she wanted. She wanted to go to a job and come home, which I put the wrong tone on it, but if that's what she wanted to do, then I obviously would have supported that and done everything I could. So that way it didn't feel like she owned a business because her husband owned a business. And, because if she wanted to just work and then come home, then I would, have done whatever I could to respect that. But because she wanted to own a business, a lot of our nighttime conversations, and sometimes this is, I have to throttle it a bit because it's just that passion. Like 90% of my thoughts throughout the day are related to this business. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's sometimes really hard for me to not start talking about it at, 5:45 in the morning when we wake up and not talk about it at 9 p.m. when we should be going to bed. And so I've had to throttle that back a bit, just because, again, I'm an all or nothing kind of guy. And so it's just always on for me. And so, but it's really nice to be able to have that at home, because when we're in the mood to have a 7 p.m. quick business chat about something, it helps us to be more productive as opposed to having to wait the next day to get in at 8 o'clock and then you have your discussion, but there's all these other things going on. And so it's been beneficial for sure. And it, when I don't go overboard, it keeps us connected to a certain degree. And when I do go overboard, it has the opposite effect. But again, it's also just the process of learning to grow with my wife in that capacity, because that's part of who we are now.
Well, and that passion is a sign that you're doing something that's right, and having mm-hmm. that amount of passion and wanting to talk about it all the time, that you're doing something that's right for you. And mm-hmm. I think that, it's the same for somebody who's into triathlon, and it's funny because I was just sitting around outside with a bunch of guys, and they were talking about basketball, and they were talking about, local guys who came out of Villanova, and, who's a league player, who's not a league player. Mm-hmm. And I turned and I looked at my buddy, and it was during the Tour de France. And I looked at him and I was like, Alaphilippe lost 5 seconds today. And he looked at me and he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, now you know how I feel. Like I have no idea who you guys are talking about. I have no idea who that kid is that you just talked about who graduated from Villanova, Right. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but everybody has something that they're passionate about. Uh-huh. And when you find that thing that you're passionate about, you want to talk about it all the time, and
Yep.
you want to constantly be doing something that is related to whatever you're passionate about. And so I can understand how, you may come home from work, and I'm sure that there are days that you come home from work and you want to leave work at work. But there's
Hmm.
probably days where you come home from work that, there's something that was very exciting, or something, maybe a Facebook ad hit really well, or, it could be anything. But there's probably definitely times where you come home from work and you're very excited, and it's probably nice to be able to have that conversation as well.
Hmm. It is.
And so one of the last things that I want to touch on, and it's more related to the business side. And as I said, when we were talking about it earlier, I did say that I was going to bring it back up again. But um, what have some of the implications been in regards to you guys do not accept insurance? And do you think that that's been something that's, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to say hurt you, but do you think that that's been a hurdle for both you and for patients?
So yes, it is a definite hurdle. I I don't know if it has hurt the business on the financial side of things, and the reason I say that is um, because within one of the reasons our healthcare system is broken here in the U.S. is because of what doctors actually get paid per patient, and there's no incentive for doctors to go above and beyond to help patients. And that sounds terrible, but it is in part, and I'll unpack this a little bit, but there's no major incentive for them to spend more time with patients once they have the minimum criteria they need to make that diagnosis, make that referral, recommend the medication, and get the next patient in. And the reason for that is our coding system. And so doctors are billed according to certain codes. Those codes are um, dictated by the government, the medical system, and those codes have criteria to them. So if the patient, for example, if a patient has one chief complaint, so they're coming in for neck pain, and you do a decent physical exam that covers their neck, and then you listen to their heart and their lungs, and just make sure they're living, then you get paid a set amount of money. And realistically, that set amount of money is about anywhere from $75 to $125. And which, sure, a lot of people would think that, holy cow, that's a lot of money for, doing that. But you also have to think about, even in the conventional system and the naturopathic system, like, doctors are coming out of school with debts around or above $250,000. Plus, if they do own their own practice, there is a lot of overhead to that. Then there's also all the ancillary costs that go with it, right? Like malpractice insurance, to make sure that you like my malpractice insurance for the year ranges probably between about $5,000 to $8,000 a year, which is not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's in the top tier for my profession because I do stem cell therapies. There are ER doctors who easily pay $10,000 to $20,000 a month for malpractice. And
Wow.
so when you have, like, there's all of these additional things that, so then doctors are now in this place where, they take 12 minutes per appointment because they need to pack in as many appointments as they can and put people through the system, because they need to put food, they need to do the basic. And I'm not saying that you know, doctors make good money at the end of the day because of that. And then rightfully so, because also they've gone through a whole lot to get there and the level of service they give. But it's still a broken system at the end of the day, where there's no incentive to spend that extra hour with a patient to try and figure out the root cause of what's going on. It's you have this, I diagnose you with this, here's the medication that is indicated for it, and I hope it helps. And, they obviously they come from a good place. They're not coming from a place of, oh, I just want to get these patients through the system and make my money. And so it's just broken from the inside out. And the reason I say that is there's no incentive for them to spend that extra hour or two sometimes to really figure out the root cause of what's going on. And so the reason I say that is because in my practice, because I don't take insurance, I can set a rate that allows me to be financially okay and to keep the business afloat. But I can take, a new patient appointment with me ranges from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, right? If it's an athlete coming in and they injured their knee, that might be an hour to an hour and a half appointment. But if I have a patient coming in and they've had low back pain for 20 years, plus they have diabetes, plus they have all these other things going on that they want help with, then I have the ability to take 2.5 hours to really sit down with them and talk about everything that's happened to date and all the things they've done, all the things that have worked, haven't worked, do a very thorough in-depth physical exam, and then spend 45 minutes or so also talking with them about the next steps, explaining what I think is going on, so that they also understand. And so I don't think it has hurt our business financially, in the sense that I think if we had accepted insurance, obviously we'd have more patients, but we'd also be paid less from the insurance company. And to add to everything else, you also have to, because insurance companies, their main goal is to not pay you. You literally have to hire someone and pay them anywhere between $60,000 and $80,000 a year to fight insurance companies to get paid. So it's so backwards. And so we have the ability to spend more time with patients because of that. And so but it makes it hard because we don't have we don't have patients calling and saying, oh, I'm going to see you because you're in my network. Right now, it's people are calling and it's either word of mouth referral, or they've been following me on Instagram for the last year or the last 6 months, or it's been 2 weeks, or however long it takes them to decide that they want to work together. And so it's a totally different beast, because now you can't just be a doctor and have people show up at your door. You have to brand yourself. You have to market. You have to understand that side of the business a lot as a business owner.
And so I want to get into just a couple things before we wrap up. And it's really just a couple things kind of about you personally, but both given your background. Is there any particular morning routine or anything that you go through when you start off your day, and you do it every single day, that has really helped you get your day off on the right foot? And it could be something that you have, found along the way, especially in your practice, or it could be something very simple, like you wake up and you start your day with movement, because a lot of people like to do that and they feel like it starts their day off on the right foot.
I wake up and I start my day with coffee. And to be honest, I really like the process of making coffee, drinking coffee, and usually I'm up a little bit before my wife, and so I bring her coffee in bed most mornings, and so that is kind of my morning ritual is coffee. I've done different things in the past. One of the things that I've gravitated towards a lot in the past is nasal breathing protocols. So I've gotten pretty close with Brian McKenzie the last year or so at Power, Speed, and Endurance. And he really kind of got me interested in nasal breathing. And it's something that I do a lot with my patients and myself personally. And so I have, so that's something that I've done. What I've found with me is if I I more so go with the flow of my days. And so if I wake up and I feel like today I need to go sit on the front porch, get some sunlight on my eyes because that helps my circadian rhythm while drinking my coffee and doing nasal breathing protocols, I'm just going to go and do that. If I wake up and I need to go to the gym that morning because that's what I feel like I need, then I do that. If I wake up and I just want to just sit and check emails while I have my coffee, then that's what I do. And so my ritual is almost not a ritual, but because of that, it's like a ritual in the sense that it's it's not stressful that I didn't get to exercise this morning because something else I did was somewhat in that time point equally important and equally set me up for my day. And I know that everything I end up doing has some purpose and it all plays out in the long run. And so I don't have a this is what I do to set my day up. I just get up, have my coffee, and I just start attacking the day.
And it's funny that you say that because I actually said that on another one of my podcasts because the long story short, the woman said she had to cut out coffee. And I'm fully aware that I may or may not have an addiction to coffee, but it's not just the caffeine. And that's what I tried to
Mm-hmm.
explain to her. I was like, it's everything surrounding coffee, whether it's a weekend and I get to take the time and grind the beans myself and make like a really
Mm-hmm.
good cup of coffee at home, or
Mm-hmm.
it's just the act of going to the coffee shop and like, opening up the door and you can smell the coffee as soon as you walk in, and there's the hustle and bustle of people grabbing their morning coffee, and you can kind of laugh sometimes at the people who are like clearly in a rush and they're just like crazed out of their minds, and you're like it's going to be
Yeah.
okay, like just take a breath. So it's the whole thing surrounding the coffee. So I'm really happy that you said that because it lets me know that I'm at least not the only one.
You're definitely not.
And if you have a couple extra minutes, could you explain what the nasal breathing is?
Yeah, so nasal breathing is doing breathing exercises only through your nose. And this has a lot of different implications for human health. So, from a developmental biology standpoint, our mouths were came from the part of our embryo that was designed for the gut, and so the mouth is actually an extension of our GI system. The nose actually comes from the portion that is linked to the respiratory system, so our lungs. And so, even from a developmental biology standpoint, like our nose was designed for respiration and our mouth was designed for eating. Now they're connected, and there has obviously been a reason that we can also breathe through our mouths, but that is not the primary way that we should be breathing. We should be breathing through our nose and not through our mouth. Now, our society has become a largely mouth breathing society for multiple different reasons, but a lot of it actually boils down to stress and the way we have kind of conditioned ourselves in that side, and probably actually a lot of in middle school and high school when your coach tells you in through your nose out through your mouth, and while that makes a lot of intuitive sense, a lot of the work that Brian McKenzie has been highlighting, and it's now in the full medical literature, is when properly done and properly trained, you can actually get a higher VO2 output with the same effort when you nasal breathe compared to when you are mouth breathing. And so, from a athletic performance side of the equation, obviously this is when you can actually get a little bit above the lactic threshold, but for the endurance sports, when properly trained, you're actually a more efficient athlete when you nasal breathe as opposed to mouth breathe. And again, at some point, you might have to tip over into mouth breathing for that last leg where you've really ramped it up and lactic acid is building up and things like that. So it's nice that we can do that, but you would get better performance from nasal breathing. But aside from the performance side, there's specific nasal breathing protocols you can do, which you play with the timing of the inhale, the hold between the inhale and the exhale, and then the hold between the exhale and the inhale. And by doing certain protocols, you can tap into modulating your own nervous system. And so there are some like more Wim Hof style breathing exercises, which are very quick, rapid expansion of the diaphragm that actually help to increase the sympathetic nervous system, which helps you to become more alert and more awake in the morning. And then in the evenings, you can do different breathing exercises where you're actually holding your breath for a significant amount of time and then a slow exhale, and you're actually allowing carbon dioxide levels to slightly build up in your blood. And that actually has a calming effect on your nervous system, which is slightly counterintuitive, but it actually, these apnea breathing protocols, as they're called, help to actually down regulate the sympathetic nervous system, which allows your parasympathetic nervous system to be heightened, and it can actually help you sleep. And so, I mean, the absolute wizard with all of this and fine tuning it to performance is Brian McKenzie. But I've started taking a lot of that stuff and applying it with my patients and seeing really phenomenal results on their health. And mainly it's helping their health because they're sleeping better, their body is handling stress better. Those are the two biggest things.
Awesome. Well, you just probably peaked up a bunch of ears when you started talking about using breath for endurance, because like I was telling you, there's definitely a very high percentage of listeners coming from that background. So I'm sure we're going to have a bunch of people Googling Brian McKenzie breathing when this is posted. So, and I mean, I'm going to do it myself as well, but I've also used the 4-7-8. Have you heard of the 4-7-8?
I'm assuming that's the cadence on like 4-second inhale, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that
so go ahead.
I was going to say that definitely helps in the evenings as far as calming down and getting ready for bed.
Yeah, so that's very similar to the apnea breathing protocol that I use in the evening. Mine is so it's a 1-3-2-0, I would determine my base number. Right now, my base number is I think about 7. So I'm basically doing a 7-second inhale, a hold for 21 seconds, and then a 14-second exhale, and then right back into the inhale. And so that 1-3-2-0, you can apply it. So if you were to try it, yours would be like a 4-12-8, and then going through. So that breath hold and the exhale would be a little bit longer than what you're used to, but that might actually help increase the calming effect of the actual breathing.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Drew, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I enjoyed some of the great little nuggets that you shared. Obviously, most recently being all the breathing, from Brian McKenzie and kind of how you've applied that. So if you could do me a favor and just let the listener know where they can get in touch with you, whether it be to follow and see what you're up to, or just learn some more things that, some of this content that you're putting out there, because I know you're pushing a lot of content out there right now.
Yeah. So biggest places, probably Instagram at Regenerative Performance is where I spend most of my time and put most of my content. I do some longer form stuff on YouTube as well. I think for that one, you would search Drew Timmermans. You could probably also search Regenerative Performance and you'll find it as well. But those are probably the two biggest places. And I'm pretty open to DMs. I'm not so big on Instagram that I can't get to my DMs. And so if anyone has any specific questions, they can hit me up there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Dr. Drew, thank you again so much for coming on, and I look forward to sharing this interview.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
So that is it. That is my interview with Dr. Drew. And I think that it's very interesting that Dr. Drew has the ability to set up his appointments in such a way that allows him to spend extra time with his patients to really get to the root cause of what is happening and what can be causing them the pain that they are in. Because as I'm sure you have been in, I have been in a situation where you go and visit the doctor and it feels like it's rushed. It feels like they get in, they get out, and they may not have the time to spend with you because of the way that the system is set up. So I thought that it was very interesting that Dr. Drew has this ability and this flexibility, and I find it admirable that he is taking the time to do this and taking the time to really spend with his patients to get to the root cause of the issue that they are having. I hope that this was an enlightening episode for you as a reader, and I hope that you have some time to consider some of the things that we discussed. Specifically, if you're an endurance athlete, some of the breathing exercises that we talked about in this episode that could definitely help you. So I thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today. And if you enjoyed this episode or any of the other episodes here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, please do me a favor and leave a review on the app that you are currently listening. It's something that takes just a couple minutes to do, but it's going to help me so much in growing the show and growing the community surrounding the Do It For Yourself podcast. So I thank you for hanging out with us today, and I look forward to having you back on the next episode.